Hollywood, 1996. Whitney Houston sat in a plush leather chair on the 40th floor of Paramount Pictures, staring at a contract that would make her the highest-paid actress in history. $10 million for a single film. Her signature was all that stood between financial security and walking away from the biggest payday of her career. The studio executives had flown in from Los Angeles specifically for this meeting. The director was a 3-time Oscar winner. The script was being called the next Pulitzer Prize-worthy adaptation. Every detail had been negotiated to perfection. But as Whitney turned to page 47 of the script, her hands began to shake. What she read there would force her to make a choice between money and faith, between Hollywood's approval and God's approval, between $10 million and her eternal soul. The decision Whitney made next shocked the entire entertainment industry. If you've ever wondered what it truly costs to stand up for your beliefs when everything is on the line, subscribe and hit that notification bell. This is the story of the day Whitney Houston chose her faith over fame, and how that single decision changed the trajectory of her entire life. Let's go back to where this impossible choice began. January 1996. Whitney Houston was at the absolute peak of her career, but also at one of the most financially vulnerable moments of her life. The Bodyguard had made her a global superstar, but the massive success came with massive expenses. Her production company was hemorrhaging money. Bobby Brown's failed business ventures had drained significant resources from their joint accounts, and the IRS was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about back taxes that totaled well into 7 figures. Whitney's business manager, Gene Harvey, had been frantically searching for a major payday that could solve all their financial problems at once. When a call came from Paramount Pictures in late December 1995, it seemed like divine intervention. Martin Scorsese himself wanted Whitney for his next film, a period drama about a jazz singer in 1920s New Orleans who becomes involved in the occult practices that were prevalent in the city's underground culture. The script, titled Midnight in Storyville, was being called the most ambitious musical drama since The Cotton Club. Industry insiders were already predicting Oscar nominations. More importantly, Paramount was offering Whitney $10 million up front, plus back-end participation that could push her total earnings past $20 million if the film became a hit. "This is the one, Whitney," Gene told her during their first phone call about the project. "This is the film that establishes you as a serious actress. No more bodyguard romances. No more music videos with acting. This is Scorsese. This is prestige. This is legacy." Whitney was intrigued but cautious. She had turned down several film roles since The Bodyguard because they didn't feel right. Her mother, Sissy Houston, had raised her with a simple principle that guided every major decision. If it doesn't glorify God, it's not for you. But $10 million was hard to ignore, especially when creditors were calling and the financial pressure was mounting daily. The script arrived at Whitney's New Jersey estate in a plain brown envelope marked confidential. It was a Friday afternoon in February 1996, and Whitney was alone in her home office. Bobby was in Los Angeles working on a recording project. Her daughter Bobby Christina was at school. The house was unusually quiet. Whitney poured herself a glass of wine and settled into her reading chair to dive into what everyone was calling the role of a lifetime. The first 30 pages were brilliant. Scorsese had crafted a character named Delilah Rose who was complex, flawed, ambitious, and deeply human. The dialogue was sharp, the period details were impeccable, and the musical numbers were woven seamlessly into the narrative. By page 40, Whitney was completely absorbed. Delilah Rose wasn't just a character. She was a mirror reflecting parts of Whitney's own journey. The pressure to perform, the struggle to maintain authenticity in a corrupt industry, the tension between artistic integrity and commercial success. This was exactly the kind of meaty, substantial role that could redefine her career. Then came page 47. The scene was set in a candlelit basement beneath a New Orleans speakeasy. Delilah Rose, desperate to save her failing career and escape an abusive manager, is introduced to a woman known only as Mama Laveau, a practitioner of voodoo who promises to give Delilah everything she desires in exchange for a ceremony that would bind her to dark spiritual forces. Whitney read the scene once, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Then she read it again, this time more slowly, hoping she had misunderstood. The stage directions were explicit. Delilah would participate in a ritual that involved animal sacrifice, blood oaths, and the invocation of spirits that were clearly demonic in nature. The scene was written to be artistic and historically accurate rather than gratuitous, but the spiritual implications were unmistakable. What made it worse was what came after. The script showed Delilah's career taking off after the ritual, her voice becoming supernaturally powerful, her success meteoric and unstoppable. The implication was clear. She had sold her soul for stardom, and it had worked. The film would end ambiguously, leaving audiences to debate whether the dark forces were real or merely psychological manifestations of Delilah's guilt and ambition. Whitney set the script down and walked to the window overlooking her property. Her hands were trembling. She thought about the $10 million. She thought about the IRS notices sitting in her accountant's office. She thought about Bobby's failed businesses and the mounting pressure to maintain the lifestyle they had built. Most of all, she thought about her mother's voice echoing from childhood. If it doesn't glorify God, it's not for you. The Paramount executives had scheduled the contract signing for February 14th, Valentine's Day, at their New York offices. They wanted the announcement to coincide with the Oscar season, generating maximum publicity for the project. Whitney's entire team was ecstatic about the deal. Gene Harvey, her business manager, had already started planning how to allocate the funds to solve their most pressing financial problems. Her publicist was drafting press releases. Her agent was negotiating additional perks like private jets and luxury accommodations during the 6-month shoot. But Whitney hadn't called anyone back after reading the script. For 3 days, she sat alone in her prayer room, the small space in her house where she kept her Bible, her gospel records, and pictures of her grandmother who had been a minister. She prayed, she cried, she read scripture, and she wrestled with a decision that seemed impossible. On one side was financial security, artistic validation, career elevation, and the respect of Hollywood's elite. On the other side was something harder to quantify, but impossible to ignore. Her relationship with God, her integrity as a Christian, and the example she was setting for her daughter and for the millions of young people who looked up to her. The morning of February 14th, Whitney woke up knowing what she had to do. She called Gene Harvey first. His reaction was explosive. "Whitney, you haven't even signed a contract yet, and you're already talking about walking away. Do you understand what you're throwing away here? This is Scorsese. This is $10 million. This is everything we've been working toward." Whitney's voice was calm but firm. "Gene, I need you to trust me on this. I've prayed about it, and I can't do this film. The spiritual cost is too high." Gene tried every argument he could think of. "It's just acting. It's a period piece about historical practices. Millions of people will see your talent. Think about your family's financial security. Think about your legacy." But Whitney had made her decision, and nothing was going to change her mind. The Paramount Pictures conference room on the 40th floor overlooking Manhattan was designed to intimidate and impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city. The massive mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. Original movie posters from the studio's greatest hits lined the walls. This was where stars were made and deals were closed. When Whitney walked in at 2 o'clock that afternoon, the room was full. Martin Scorsese sat at the head of the table, his legendary intensity softened by a warm smile. 3 studio executives in expensive suits flanked him, their leather portfolios and Mont Blanc pens at the ready. Whitney's agent and business manager sat on the opposite side, their faces radiating confidence that this was merely a formality before the biggest payday of Whitney's career. "Whitney, wonderful to see you," Scorsese said, standing to greet her with a handshake. "I've been so excited about this project. I truly believe you're the only actress who can bring Delilah Rose to life. This character requires someone who understands the burden of extraordinary talent, and you understand that better than anyone." Whitney smiled politely and took her seat. The contract was already laid out in front of her, open to the signature page. A Mont Blanc pen, probably worth more than most people's monthly salary, sat beside it like a loaded weapon. $10 million was one signature away. The lead executive, a man named David Kellerman, began his pitch with practiced enthusiasm. "Whitney, I want to start by saying how thrilled we all are to be working with you. This isn't just a film. It's a cultural event. We're planning a premiere at Cannes, an Oscar campaign that starts in the fall, and merchandising opportunities that could extend your brand into..." "Mr. Kellerman," Whitney interrupted gently. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something about the script. The room went quiet. Scorsese leaned forward, his filmmaker's instincts sensing that something unexpected was happening. Of course, Kellerman said, his smile unwavering. What questions do you have? We're happy to discuss any concerns. Whitney opened her own copy of the script and turned to page 47. This scene, the ritual with Mama Laveau. Can you walk me through your artistic vision for how this would be portrayed? Scorsese's eyes lit up the way they always did when discussing his craft. He launched into a detailed explanation of his vision for the scene, talking about the historical accuracy of voodoo practices in 1920s New Orleans, the cinematography techniques he planned to use, the symbolic meaning of the ritual as a metaphor for how artists sacrifice parts of themselves for success. Whitney listened patiently, but as Scorsese spoke, she felt an increasing certainty about what she needed to do. This wasn't about artistic merit or historical accuracy. This was about what she was willing to attach her name, her face, and her soul to. When Scorsese finished his explanation, Whitney took a deep breath and spoke words that would shock everyone in the room. Mr. Scorsese, I have nothing but respect for your talent and your vision. But I can't do this film. The silence that followed was deafening. Scorsese looked confused. The executives looked panicked. Whitney's own team looked like they had been physically struck. I'm sorry, Whitney continued, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. I've read this script carefully, and I've prayed about it extensively. The spiritual themes in this film go against everything I believe in as a Christian. I can't portray a character who makes a pact with dark forces, even in a historical or artistic context. My faith won't allow it. David Kellerman found his voice first, and his tone had shifted from enthusiastic to desperate. Whitney, I understand your concerns, but you have to understand this is art. You're not endorsing these practices. You're portraying a character in a specific historical context. We can make adjustments to the scene if. It's not about adjustments, Whitney interrupted firmly. It's about what I'm comfortable putting my name on. I was raised in the church. My mother is Whitney Houston. My family built their lives on gospel music and faith in God. I can't stand in front of cameras and pretend to invoke spirits that the Bible clearly identifies as demonic, even if it's just acting. I can't do that to my daughter, to my family, or to the young people who look up to me. Gene Harvey, Whitney's business manager, was practically vibrating with frustration. Whitney, can we take a moment in private to discuss this? But Whitney shook her head. There's nothing to discuss, Gene. I've made my decision. Martin Scorsese, to his credit, seemed to understand something that the executives didn't. He had worked with enough artists to recognize genuine conviction when he saw it. Whitney, he said quietly, I respect your position. I don't agree with it from an artistic standpoint, but I respect it. Can I ask you a question, though? What would it take for you to reconsider? If we rewrote the scene entirely, removed all the occult elements, made Delilah's success come from her own talent and hard work rather than any supernatural intervention, would you reconsider? Whitney appreciated the question and the genuine respect in Scorsese's tone. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. Mr. Scorsese, I appreciate you asking. But the truth is, even if you rewrote that scene, I know what you originally wrote. I know what you envisioned for this character. And I can't separate that knowledge from the project. Every time I would perform a scene, I would be thinking about what you originally intended. I would be compromising, and I've learned that when it comes to my faith, compromise is where the devil does his best work. The room was silent again, but this time the silence had a different quality. It was the silence of people realizing they were witnessing something they had never encountered before in Hollywood. An A-list star turning down a life-changing payday, not for more money, not for better terms, but for spiritual reasons they couldn't understand or argue against. David Kellerman made one last attempt, his voice taking on an edge that suggested this was no longer a negotiation, but a warning. Whitney, I need you to understand what you're walking away from. This is $10 million. This is Martin Scorsese. This is the kind of prestige that opens every door in Hollywood. If you walk away from this, word will spread. Studios will think you're difficult to work with. Directors will hesitate to offer you serious roles. You could be damaging your film career permanently. Whitney stood up, and when she spoke, there was a strength in her voice that came from somewhere deeper than confidence or stubbornness. It was the strength of someone who had counted the cost and decided their soul was worth more than their career. Mr. Kellerman, I understand everything you're saying. I know what I'm walking away from. But here's what you need to understand. I didn't get my voice from Hollywood. I got it from God. I didn't get my success from Martin Scorsese. I got it from being faithful to who God called me to be. And if being faithful means I never make another film in Hollywood, then I'll go back to what I know best. I'll make gospel albums. I'll sing in churches. I'll do what my mother did, using my voice to glorify God instead of glorify myself. She pushed the unsigned contract across the table, leaving the expensive pen untouched. I'm sorry for wasting your time. I genuinely hope the film is successful with whoever you cast, but it won't be me. With that, Whitney Houston walked out of the conference room, leaving $10 million and the role of a lifetime sitting on the table behind her. The moment Whitney left the Paramount building, her business manager and agent followed her out, their faces flushed with anger and disbelief. The argument that erupted on the Manhattan sidewalk was fierce and brief. Jean Harvey told her she had just committed career suicide. Her agent said she would never get another serious film offer. Both of them predicted financial disaster within months. Whitney listened calmly to their predictions and then said something that ended the conversation. If my career can only survive by compromising my faith, then maybe God is trying to tell me something about the career I've built. I'd rather be poor and right with God than rich and separated from Him. That statement effectively ended her relationships with both men. Within 2 weeks, Jean Harvey and her agent had both resigned, unable to work with a client who had turned down $10 million for religious reasons they considered irrational. The entertainment industry's reaction was swift and exactly as predicted. Within days, stories began circulating that Whitney Houston was difficult, unreliable, and had bizarre religious hang-ups that made her impossible to work with. Other film offers that had been in various stages of negotiation suddenly evaporated. Directors who had expressed interest in working with her stopped returning calls. But something else happened that nobody anticipated. Whitney's decision resonated with millions of people outside the Hollywood bubble who were tired of seeing their faith treated as something to be compromised for money or success. Churches across America began talking about Whitney's choice as an example of real Christian conviction in a secular world. Gospel radio stations played her music constantly, celebrating her as someone who had chosen God over gold. Most significantly, Denzel Washington called her. He had heard through the industry grapevine about what happened, and he wanted her to know something important. Whitney, I heard what you did at Paramount. I want you to know that what you did took more courage than anything I've ever seen in this industry. But I also want you to know that there are people in Hollywood who respect what you did, even if they don't understand it. I'm working on a project right now that I think you'd be perfect for. It's called The Preacher's Wife. And I think God might have had you walk away from that other film specifically so you'd be available for this one. 6 months after walking away from Scorsese's $10 million offer, Whitney Houston signed on to star in The Preacher's Wife opposite Denzel Washington. The film, about an angel who comes to help a struggling minister and his wife rediscover their faith in their marriage, was exactly the kind of project Whitney had been praying for. It affirmed faith instead of mocking it, elevated the church instead of exploiting it, and gave Whitney the chance to use her platform to spread a message she actually believed in. The financial terms weren't as spectacular as the Paramount deal. She made $7 million instead of 10. But $7 million without compromising her soul felt better than $10 million with compromise. More importantly, the film allowed her to create a gospel soundtrack that became one of the best-selling gospel albums of all time, reconnecting her with her gospel roots and her church audience in a way that a Scorsese film never could have. The Preacher's Wife was released in December 1996 and became a massive success, earning over $48 million at the box office and introducing Whitney to a whole new generation of fans who appreciated her willingness to use her fame to promote faith rather than just fame itself. When Whitney attended the premiere with her mother Sissy by her side, she whispered something that Sissy later shared with close friends. "Mama, you were right. If it doesn't glorify God, it's not for me. Thank you for teaching me that, even when it cost me $10 million. The ripple effects of Whitney's decision continued for years. Other Christian artists in Hollywood began speaking more openly about their faith and their boundaries. Several high-profile actors turned down roles that conflicted with their religious beliefs, citing Whitney's example as inspiration. The conversation in Hollywood shifted slightly, with some producers beginning to understand that there was a massive audience of faith-based viewers who would support films that respected rather than mocked their beliefs. But the most important impact was on Whitney herself. Years later, during one of her struggles with addiction and public scrutiny, she would return again and again to that moment on the 40th floor of Paramount Pictures. She would remember that she had once chosen God over $10 million, and that memory would remind her that she was capable of making hard choices when her faith demanded it. That day taught me something crucial. Whitney told her close friend B.B. Winans during a particularly difficult period in the early 2000s. It taught me that I could survive choosing God over everything else. I didn't die when I walked away from that money. My career didn't end. God provided something better. And if God did it once, He could do it again. I just had to have the courage to trust Him like I did that day. The story of Whitney Houston walking away from $10 million never made the tabloid headlines the way her struggles with addiction did. The entertainment media wasn't interested in stories about faith and conviction. They wanted scandal and drama. But within the Christian community and among people who valued integrity over image, the story became legendary. At Whitney's funeral in 2012, Denzel Washington shared the story publicly for the first time, revealing to the world what had happened in that Paramount conference room 16 years earlier. Whitney made a choice that day that most people in our industry would never even consider, Denzel said through tears. She chose her faith over her fortune, and God honored that choice by giving her the preacher's wife and so many other blessings. Whitney wasn't perfect. None of us are. But in that moment, she was faithful, and that's what mattered most to her. The lesson of Whitney's decision resonates far beyond Hollywood or the music industry. It speaks to anyone who has ever faced the choice between doing what's profitable and doing what's right, between compromising for success and standing firm in conviction, between temporary gain and eternal integrity. Whitney Houston had flaws, made mistakes, and struggled with demons that eventually contributed to her tragic death. But on one February afternoon in 1996, she got it absolutely right. She proved that some things, namely your relationship with God and the integrity of your soul, are worth more than all the money and fame Hollywood can offer. The unsigned contract from Paramount Pictures was never offered to another actress. Scorsese eventually shelved the project, saying he couldn't find anyone who embodied the character the way he had envisioned Whitney doing it. The film was never made, and the $10 million was never paid. But Whitney Houston walked away from that conference room with something more valuable than money. She walked away with her faith intact, her integrity uncompromised, and the knowledge that when it mattered most, she had chosen God over gold. That choice didn't make headlines. It didn't win awards. It didn't trend on social media because social media didn't exist yet. But it mattered infinitely more than any of those things. Because at the end of our lives, we won't be judged by the size of our bank accounts or the prestige of our careers. We'll be judged by the moments when we had to choose between the world's approval and God's approval, and which one we valued more. Whitney Houston made that choice. And for anyone struggling with their own version of that impossible decision, her example stands as proof that you can survive choosing faith over fortune, that God honors those who honor Him, and that the temporary cost of conviction is always worth the eternal reward of integrity. This incredible story shows us that true success isn't measured by the contracts we sign, but by the compromises we refuse to make. Whitney Houston walked away from $10 million to protect her soul, and God gave her something far more valuable in return. When have you had to choose between profit and principle? Share your story in the comments below. If this message inspired you to think about what you're willing to sacrifice for your faith, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because we have more powerful stories that prove faith and integrity matter more than fame and fortune. Until next time, remember, your soul is worth more than any paycheck.